Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really ambitious set of sources. It's essentially a spiritual treatise trying to bridge thousands of years of prophecy.
That's right. It's trying to connect the dots between the messianic expectations of, well, some of the world's biggest faiths. We're talking Judaism, Christianity, and Hinduism.
It's definitely more than just comparing religions side by side.
Oh, absolutely. It's attempting something more like spiritual engineering, maybe.
Yeah.
The source material basically argues that the key figures, everyone's waiting for the Messiah, the second coming, Kalki, are actually, well, one and the same.
One single divine figure.
The singular eternal God, but appearing in human form. That's the core claim.
Okay. So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack that. The central idea is this shift the world is supposedly making from what Hinduism calls the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness,
Into the Satya Yuga, the age of truth.
And this source claims this huge transformation isn't just theoretical, it's happening now. So we're going to try and understand the reasoning behind that claim. It's complex stuff.
It is. And right off the bat, it forces you to rethink something really ingrained, especially in the West.
Yeah.
The whole idea of the end times.
Yeah, let's get into that. Because when you hear end times, especially if you grew up in, say, an Abrahamic tradition.
You probably think destruction,
Yeah.
total annihilation, fire, brimstone, the works.
Right. That's kind of the default image, isn't it? Apocalypse now.
But this source points out what it sees as a big logical problem, a paradox almost, right there in that traditional view.
Which is?
Well, think about the prophecies. Whether you call him the Messiah or Christ, the figure is supposed to return and rule the earth, right? Establish a kingdom.
That's a common thread, yes. Justice, peace, divine rule on earth.
Okay, so how does that work if the earth is just, a smoldering wreck? Who or what is being ruled? It doesn't quite add up logically.
Rule over ashes. I see the point. So the source rejects the total destruction idea.
Completely. It argues that the end times aren't about the end of the planet, but the end of an age. Specifically, the end of this current age, defined by darkness, ignorance, and, well, spiritual confusion.
So it's a transformation, not obliteration, a cosmic cleanup, maybe?
Exactly. Cosmic renewal, purification. Not wiping the slate clean by smashing it, but by restoring it. And the source actually uses a very familiar prayer to back this up.
Which one?
The Lord's Prayer. Specifically the line, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven."
On earth.
Right. The source emphasizes that part. It's a direct request for God the Father to establish his kingdom here on this planet. And you can't really have a kingdom without, well, a functioning territory.
So the earth has to survive for the prayer to even make sense in that context. It needs to be purified, maybe healed, but not destroyed.
That's the interpretation presented. The earth is the stage for this divine kingdom. So fearing the end times as, like, a cosmic eviction notice, the source says that's missing the point.
It's reframing it entirely. It's the end of human misrule, the end of lies and half-truths.
The end of the Kali Yuga's influence, basically. But creation itself, that survives. It has to.
It's a shift from scarcity of truth to abundance, from confusion to clarity.
Precisely. From the Kali Yuga, where coercion and misunderstanding are rampant, to the Satya Yuga, where divine order Dharma, as the source calls it, is restored naturally. It's the end of ignorance, and that requires a fundamental change, a transformation.
Okay, that's a huge conceptual shift right there. But how does this happen? How does the world pivot from one age to the next? Does the source get specific?
It does. And this is where it gets, as you said earlier, really interesting. The source claims this transition isn't just a slow, abstract evolution. It's triggered, or at least marked, by the direct physical appearance of the divine among us.
So divine incarnation, God showing up in person, essentially.
That's the core mechanism described. The source talks about this eternal sustainer of the cosmos having a pattern, a cycle of intervention.
The pattern, not just a one-off event.
According to this text, no. It argues that when the darkness, the unrighteousness, reaches its absolute peak, when the world is most in need, that's when God manifests physically within humanity.
Like dawn breaking after the darkest part of the night?
That's the exact analogy used, light breaking the night. And the purpose, each time this happens, is presented as consistent, restore righteousness, restore truth, and in doing so establish the true kingship of earth, replacing the flawed, corrupted rule of humankind.
Okay, a cosmic cycle of intervention. But then the source connects this huge metaphysical idea to something very, very specific and, frankly, politically loaded.
You're talking about the Third Temple.
Yes.
Yes.
The source explicitly links the end of the Kali Yuga, this grand cosmic shift, to the physical building of the Third Temple in Jerusalem.
It does. And this really anchors the whole theological argument in present-day geopolitics. It doesn't shy away from it.
It's incredibly direct about the existing structure there, the mosque on the Temple Mount.
Very direct. The source labels the mosque currently standing on the site where the Third Temple is prophesied to be built as a form of spiritual obstruction.
Obstruction, that's a strong word.
It is. It defines it not as inherently evil, perhaps, but as a temporal barrier, something preventing the necessary transition to the age of divine reign. And the source states very clearly that the time for this obstruction is now over.
So the actual physical construction of this Third Temple becomes what's starting gun for the New Age.
That's precisely how it's framed. The definitive physical marker signaling the end of the Kali Yuga and the beginning of the direct reign of God on earth, which, as you said, ties this vast spiritual timeline directly to concrete events in the Middle East. It's not just theology anymore, it's current events.
That creates a palpable sense of urgency, doesn't it? Like time is running out.
It certainly injects a divine deadline feeling into the narrative. The source emphasizes that the divine impulse is always compassion, always renewal. But human free will plays a critical role in how smoothly this transition happens.
What do you mean?
It argues that individuals and groups who refuse to awaken, who cling to the darkness or the old ways, who resist the incoming universal truth, they inevitably create conflict.
Like historical or mythological figures who chose the wrong side.
Exactly. The source draws parallels to figures like Ravana in the Ramayana or Duryodhana in the Mahabharata characters who actively chose ego and darkness over dharma and light, even when the truth was presented to them. That resistance, the source claims, leads to strife, to war.
So conflict is possible, even likely, if humanity resists.
It seems to be presented as a consequence of rejecting the divine renewal. However, the source is careful to stress that the ultimate goal is always restoration, not punishment for its own sake. Any conflict, it insists, should be about establishing spiritual clarity and minimizing harm, not about vengeance or destruction. The fight is for renewal.
Okay, I have to push back a little here, or at least voice what many listeners might be thinking. For millions, billions of people, that site in Jerusalem, the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount, is profoundly sacred. Calling a structure there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, an obstruction, feels inherently confrontational, potentially dangerous rhetoric. How does the source justify this seemingly harsh stance alongside a message of universal truth and compassion?
That's an absolutely crucial question. The source attempts to navigate this by framing the ultimate goal not as the destruction of any people, but as the necessary end of fragmented faiths themselves. The real obstruction, in this view, isn't just the physical building, but the entire system of divided, incomplete religions born during the Age of Darkness.
So the transition to the Satya Yuga means the end of, well, basically all existing organized religions as we know them. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, even what we call Hinduism today.
That's the assertion. All religions that serve their purpose during the Kali Yuga, the age of limited understanding, become obsolete in the direct presence of the divine.
Ah, okay, so this is the dissolution argument we touched on.
Precisely. The source uses a powerful metaphor here. It describes religion as a bridge built by humanity to try and reach God across the chasm of ignorance that defines the Kali Yuga.
A bridge across the darkness.
Yes. But the source asks, what happens when God is no longer distant? What happens when the divine incarnation stands directly before humanity, offering the full truth unveiled?
That's also leave its bridge.
You don't need the bridge anymore.
Exactly. The bridge dissolves. Not because it's destroyed in anger, but because its function is complete. The distance it was built to span simply ceases to exist. The presence of the divine reality makes the religious structure redundant.
So it's not presented as a hostile takeover, but more like spiritual graduation.
That's another analogy the source uses, similar to what you mentioned earlier. It's like moving from high school to university. Your high school education was essential, foundational even. You don't burn your diploma. But its concepts are integrated into and superseded by a much higher, more comprehensive level of knowledge. So humanity collectively graduates from these separate, sometimes conflicting high school faiths
into a single universal university of truth. This universal framework is what the source refers to as Dharma, not a religion in the Kali Yuga sense, but the inherent cosmic righteousness, the underlying science of reality itself.
The fragmented perspectives needed during the Dark Age just can't hold up in the full light of the new one.
They simply dissolve in the face of direct, unified truth. The source positions this divine arrival, this incarnation, as the ultimate unifying answer to millennia of prayers for peace, understanding, and an end to religious conflict. It's the solution that transcends the divisions it argues were only necessary because the full truth wasn't present.
Which brings us inevitably to the absolute core of this treatise, the claim that requires, I think, the biggest mental leap for most people listening.
You mean the synthesis, the unity of the messianic figures.
Exactly. The argument that the figures awaited by Jews, Christians, and Hindus are not just similar, but literally the same being.
This is, without doubt, the source's most audacious and, you could say, revolutionary claim. It proposes a grand convergence of prophecy, cutting straight through centuries, millennia, of deep theological separation and often mutual exclusivity.
Okay, let's break down that convergence very carefully. Who are the three figures being unified here?
All right, first you have the Jewish people awaiting the Messiah. Traditionally understood, broadly speaking, as Yahweh himself acting in history, perhaps through an anointed human king, to establish divine rule, justice, and redemption, often centered on Jerusalem.
Okay, the Messiah.
Second, you have Christians awaiting the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, God made flesh, who already came once, died, resurrected, and promised to return in glory to judge the living and the dead and establish his eternal kingdom.
The second coming. And third,
you have Hindus, particularly within Vaishnavism, awaiting the final 10th avatar of Lord Vishnu. This is Kalki, who is prophesied to appear at the very end of the Kali Yuga, riding a white horse, wielding a sword of light.
to destroy wickedness and usher in the Satya Yuga.
Precisely. To destroy ignorance and corruption and restore Dharma, the age of truth. Now, the source looks at these three distinct expectations and makes a breathtakingly simple yet profound statement.
Which is,
These are not three different saviors. These are not separate events. They're descriptions from different cultural and linguistic contexts of the exact same event and the exact same divine personality. One God, one final incarnation, fulfilling all prophecies simultaneously.
wow. Okay, hold on. Just playing devil's advocate here, or rather, voicing what millions, maybe billions of Orthodox believers would immediately say. Isn't this just syncretism? Isn't it taking distinct traditions and mushing them together in a way that violates the core tenets of each?
That's the immediate objection, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you have Jewish monotheism with its absolute prohibition on associating partners with God or even conceiving of God in human form in the same way Christianity does. Then you have Christianity with the unique role of Jesus as the only Son of God. And then Hinduism with its vast cosmology, cyclical time, and the concept of multiple avatars, not just one final one. Trying to fuse these seems, on the surface, like it dissolves the unique integrity of each faith, doesn't it? How does the source even begin to reconcile these massive theological differences?
That is the absolute crux of the challenge, and the source doesn't shy away from it. It argues that the perceived differences are largely superficial, rooted in language, culture, and the fragmented understanding available during the Kali Yuga. It claims the underlying function and essence being described are identical.
Function and essence, how does it demonstrate that?
It tackles it head-on by examining the divine names and their core meanings. It starts by comparing Yahweh and Vishnu.
Okay, let's start with Yahweh. What's the source's take there?
It looks at the Hebrew name YHWH, Yahweh, often translated as I am that I am, or perhaps I will be what I will be, from the encounter with Moses. The source interprets this not just as a name, but as a statement of absolute, uncreated, self-existent being, the timeless, eternal reality who is the ultimate source and sustainer of all that exists.
The ground of being, the sustainer, the key word there being sustainer. Now, it turns to Vishnu.
And the connection is?
The name Vishnu comes from the Sanskrit root vish, and vish means to enter, to pervade. Vishnu, across all Hindu traditions, is fundamentally understood as the preserver, the protector, the sustainer of the cosmos. He's the one who pervades all existence, who maintains cosmic order, Dharma, who is omnipresent and eternal.
Ah, sustainer and pervader, preserver.
Exactly. The source basically says, look, strip away the Hebrew, strip away the Sanskrit, strip away the specific cultural stories that grew around these names over millennia. What core function, what essential role in the cosmos are both names describing?
They're both describing the one who keeps the whole show running, the preserver, the sustainer. Precisely. One language calls this reality Yahweh, the self-existent sustainer. The other calls it Vishnu, the all-pervading preserver. The source concludes, it's the same cosmic personality, the same fundamental divine function, being described using different words from different points in history and geography. Therefore, Yahweh, in essential function, is Vishnu.
So the argument hinges on the job description being identical, even if the cultural packaging looks wildly different. It's not just playing with words, it's about the fundamental role in the universe.
That's the core of the synthesis, yes. It's a functional equivalence argument. And then, crucially, the source uses the Hindi framework, which it presents as the oldest continuous record of divine intervention, to provide a pattern for this kind of event.
A pattern of incarnation.
Yes. This helps contextualize the Jewish and Christian expectation of what often seems like a singular, unique, end-of-history event. The Hindu perspective, as presented by the source, suggests this is actually the culmination of a long-established cycle.
Is there a specific scriptural basis cited for this cyclical pattern?
Oh, absolutely. The source points directly to one of the most foundational verses in Hindu scripture. From the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 7, is Lord Krishna speaking.
I think I know this one. Whenever righteousness declines,
and unrighteousness is rampant, O descendant of Bharata, then I manifest myself.
Yare yare dharmasya glanirva bhavati farata avyutanam adharmasya tadatamanam sartmiyaham.
So that verse establishes it right there. A built-in cosmic mechanism for divine intervention whenever things get bad enough.
Exactly. It's presented as an eternal promise, a standard operating procedure for the cosmos, documented thousands of years ago. And the source doesn't just leave it theoretical. It points to specific historical examples within that documented Hindu history.
Such as
Lord Rama, who the source dates to roughly 7,000 years ago. The same eternal being, Vishnu, taking human form to defeat the embodiment of unrighteousness, Ravana, and establish Rama Raja, a kingdom of perfect justice and dharma.
Okay, Rama. And then,
more recently, around 5,000 years ago, the same eternal being returns as Lord Krishna. His mission culminates in the Kurukshetra War, where he delivers the Bhagavad Gita itself, the very text containing that promise of return, and guides the forces of righteousness against widespread corruption and adharma, unrighteousness.
So the source is saying Rama and Krishna weren't just prophets or great teachers, they were literal manifestations of the same one eternal sustainer, Vishnu Yahweh.
That's precisely the claim. Each appearance was the same divine personality, the sustainer, stepping into history to address a specific planetary crisis and restore balance. It's a recurring pattern.
Okay, so if you accept that pattern, then the expectation of a Jewish Messiah or a Christian second coming isn't some radical, unprecedented event.
Exactly. From this perspective, they become the next, and significantly the final, installment in this documented, cyclical history of divine manifestation. They are fulfilling the ancient promise restated by Krishna in the Gita, but this time, it's the concluding act for this entire cosmic cycle.
Which brings us back to Kalki.
Precisely. Kalki, the prophesied 10th and final avatar of Vishnu for this cycle, is explicitly foretold to appear at the absolute lowest point of the Kali Yuga. His mission: to destroy ignorance, eradicate evil, vanquish confusion.
And inaugurate the Satya Yuga, the age of truth. Restore Dharma.
Yes. And you look at that mission description for Kalki, and the source says, compared to the core expectations for the Messiah and the Second Coming, what are they about? Bringing divine justice, establishing lasting peace, ending wickedness, and initiating the direct, permanent reign of God on earth.
They sound remarkably similar. The end goal is identical.
The source argues they are identical. Kalki's mission is the Messiah's mission is Christ's mission upon return. It's one figure, one mission, described through three different prophetic lenses, converging at this specific point in history, the end of the Kali Yuga.
And the source then raises a really provocative point about where this incarnation might occur, doesn't it? It touches on the family or tradition it might be born into.
It does. It directly addresses the possibility, stating it as a potential reality, that if this final unified incarnation, this Kalki Messiah Christ figure, has appeared or will appear within, say, a family identified as Hindu.
What would that imply, according to the source?
It implies something profound about the nature of the underlying spiritual tradition. It would suggest, the source argues, that the spiritual path historically associated with India, the path of the Vedas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, what the source calls Sanatana Dharma, isn't just some localized pagan or polytheistic system, but is actually the foundational universal spiritual science.
It would challenge the exclusivity claims of the Abrahamic faiths at their root.
Fundamentally, it forces believers from all traditions to look beyond their cultural and theological boxes. It suggests the answer to millennia of Jewish waiting, Christian praying, and Hindu anticipation might have arrived or be arriving in a form and context they were perhaps conditioned to dismiss or even oppose. It demands, above all, unbiased discernment.
Discernment. That seems to be a recurring theme. Okay, this leads perfectly into the next logical step. If, as the source claims, all the fragmented religions born in the Kali Yuga are destined to dissolve in the light of the coming Satya Yuga, what's left? What's the operating system for the new age?
Right. If the bridges dissolve, what path do people walk? And this is where the source introduces, or rather reintroduces, a concept it argues is far older and more fundamental than the modern term Hinduism.
Which is Sanatana Dharma.
Exactly, Sanatana Dharma. The source is quite insistent that the label Hinduism is relatively recent, largely a colonial or external designation used to categorize the diverse spiritual traditions of the Indian subcontinent. It argues that the people who actually followed the teachings of the Vedas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, didn't call themselves Hindus in that sense. They saw themselves as followers of Sanatana Dharma.
And what does that term actually mean? Sanatana Dharma?
Sanatana means eternal, unchanging, without beginning or end. Dharma is a bit trickier to translate directly into English. It's often rendered as righteousness, duty, cosmic law, inherent nature, or that which upholds. So Sanatana Dharma means something like the eternal way, the eternal law, the unchanging principles that govern the cosmos and our place within it.
So it's presented not as just another ism, another religion.
Definitely not. The source explicitly defines Sanatana Dharma not as a sect, not as a belief system you have to subscribe to, but as a living science of cosmic order and divine knowledge.
A science, like physics or biology.
In the sense of being based on observable, verifiable principles and truths about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the divine truths that are inherent in the fabric of existence, not dependent on historical revelation alone. It's presented as the universe's instruction manual, if you will, accessible through direct experience and spiritual practice, not just faith.
Okay, a divine science. So how does this relate to the shift between ages? What's its role in the Satya Yuga?
The source posits something quite extraordinary here. It claims that as humanity transitions fully into the Satya Yuga, our collective spiritual and intellectual capacity will undergo a massive upgrade. It literally says our capacity will multiply 100-fold.
100-fold? That's a significant leap.
It implies a fundamental shift in human consciousness, an ability to perceive and understand reality at a much deeper level. And in that state, the source argues, the old fragmented religious dogmas of the Kali Yuga will simply be insufficient. They won't resonate with this expanded capacity.
So Sanatana Dharma, framed as this eternal underlying science,
Is what humanity will naturally turn to or rediscover as the appropriate framework for this new level of consciousness. It transcends the false divisions and limited perspectives of the Kali Yuga religions. Because it is the underlying truth, those religions were only partially glimpsing. It becomes the universal guidepost for the age of truth.
it provides the blueprint for that kingdom on earth we talked about earlier.
Precisely. The kingdom of God, the establishment of divine will on earth as it is in heaven, becomes synonymous with living according to Sanatana Dharma. It's not about establishing a specific religious institution's dominance, but about aligning human society with the inherent eternal laws of the cosmos.
So the global prayers for renewal, for peace, for truth, the source interprets these as essentially prayers for the dawn of the Satya Yuga and the restoration of Dharma.
Yes. The promise often quoted, the meek inherit the earth, is seen not just as a reward for humility, but as a statement about the earth itself being reborn, purified, and governed by these divine principles. It's moving from an age defined by conflict, confusion, and fear to one governed by light, unity, and inherent righteousness. Earth becomes the place where Dharma is fully manifest.
This all sounds very positive, almost utopian. But the transition itself, the source implies, isn't necessarily smooth or automatic. It involves a struggle, a choice.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a really critical and potentially challenging section of the source material. It shifts focus to the ethics of faith, the how of belief, and it draws a very sharp line in the sand regarding the role of free will.
This is the part about coercion versus freedom.
Exactly. This section lays out what the source sees as the fundamental spiritual battleground, the defining difference between divine influence and its opposite.
How does it define those opposites?
It's quite stark. God, the divine, is defined by inherent goodness, by liberation, clarity, enlightenment, truth, and love. Anything truly divine, it argues, seeks to uplift and free consciousness.
And the opposite, the adversary, the devil.
Defined by the opposite qualities: deceit, obscurity, confusion, subjugation, control, and fundamentally, coercion. Anything that seeks to dominate, confuse, or force belief through fear or manipulation is identified as adversarial, as anti-divine.
That philosophical distinction has immediate practical consequences for how we view religion, doesn't it?
immense consequences. The source draws a direct conclusion. If God is freedom and the devil is coercion, then any true worship, any genuine connection with the divine, must be an act of complete and unadulterated free will. It has to come from a place of choice, love, and genuine seeking.
So if any element of compulsion enters the picture,
It instantly corrupts the spiritual validity of the act, according to this source. If belief or worship is enforced, whether by political power, social pressure, threats of violence, or fear of punishment, temporal or eternal, it ceases to be a genuine spiritual offering.
it becomes mere obedience, not worship.
Worse than that, the source argues, it becomes enforced obedience, which it explicitly terms anti-religion. It's seen as hijacking the forms of religion to serve the adversarial principle of control, fundamentally betraying the divine spirit of freedom.
Okay. Now, the source uses this principle, freedom versus coercion, as a lens to analyze specific historical religious practices. And this is where we need to tread carefully and be very clear about attribution.
Absolutely. To maintain our neutrality and simply report on the content, it's crucial to state that what follows is the source's argument and analysis, using examples it selects. We aren't endorsing these specific critiques, but explaining the treatise's line of reasoning.
Got it. So the source uses Islam as a primary historical case study for this principle of coercion.
It does. It focuses specifically on the historical expansion of Islam, particularly in the centuries after its founding. The source argues that this expansion was often achieved, in its words, by the sword.
And it details the conditions offered to conquered non-Muslim populations.
Yes, it references the well-documented historical practice, prevalent in many periods and regions under Islamic rule, of offering non-Muslim people of the book, primarily Jews and Christians, 3 choices. 1. Convert to Islam. 2. Keep your faith but pay a special poll tax, the jizya, and live as subjugated second-class citizens, dhimmis, under specific restrictions.
Oh.
Or 3. Face death or expulsion.
And the source interprets the system convert, submit, and pay, or die as what?
As a quintessential example of religious coercion. The source argues that using political and military power to force conversion or to impose humiliating conditions and financial penalties on those who refuse is fundamentally stripping away free will in matters of faith. It sees the jizya not just as a tax, but as a symbol of submission enforced by the threat of violence.
This is presented as the antithesis of the divine way.
Directly. The source states baldly, tyranny is the devil's method. Liberty is God's method. It argues that any system that relies on fear, control, and the suppression of dissent to maintain religious uniformity cannot be a true expression of the divine will. It points to modern examples, too, citing states like contemporary Iran, describing them as theocratic prisons where freedom of thought, conscience, and spiritual exploration is systematically denied.
That's a strong condemnation. But the source digs even deeper theologically, focusing on the issue of apostasy, doesn't it? Leaving the faith.
Yes. This is presented as perhaps the most definitive litmus test for coercion versus freedom. The source highlights that in many traditional interpretations and legal schools within Islam, the punishment for apostasy, for a Muslim choosing to leave the faith, is death.
And the source's argument is
That making departure from the faith a capital offense represents the ultimate denial of free will. If you are born into a religious system or convert to it, and you are told you cannot leave it without forfeiting your life, then your adherence is, by definition, compelled. Your continued belief or practice, the source argues, becomes enforced obedience under threat of death.
which, in the source's framework, makes it spiritually null and void.
Worse than null and void. It argues this transforms the religion in practice into a contract of compulsion, locking people in through fear. This, according to Thoth's philosophy, fundamentally corrupts the relationship between the individual and the divine, rendering the system an anti-religion, something that uses the language of God to achieve the aims of control and subjugation.
It's a very stark framing. What does the source say is the motivation behind making this critique? Is it meant to incite hostility?
The source explicitly states otherwise. It frames its critique as arising from compassion. The stated goal is not to attack or condemn the people caught within systems perceived as coercive, but to illuminate the principle of coercion itself, which it sees as a spiritual darkness. It uses a phrase, separate the deluded from the delusion.
So the aim is enlightenment, liberation for those trapped in systems of fear, not conflict.
That's the stated intention, to expose coercion as anti-divine wherever it appears, so that individuals can reclaim their God-given free will. And importantly, this critique isn't limited to just one faith tradition.
It extends the principle more broadly.
Yes, it becomes a universal warning about the inherent dangers of any state-enforced religion. The source points to history, whether it's the Roman Empire adopting Christianity and then persecuting heretics, or medieval European monarchs enforcing Catholicism, or any modern theocracy arguing that the moment belief becomes intertwined with political power and enforced by law, it inevitably becomes corrupted.
Faith becomes an instrument of control, not a path to liberation.
Exactly. It gets twisted into a tool for social dominance, political legitimacy, and suppression of dissent, rather than a personal spiritual journey towards truth. True religion, the source insists, echoing figures throughout history, blooms only in the soil of freedom. Take away freedom, and you kill the spiritual essence, even if the outward forms remain.
So freedom of conscience, freedom from religion as much as freedom of religion, is presented as absolutely essential for genuine spirituality.
It's non-negotiable in this framework. If coercion is the poison administered by the adversary, then freedom and genuine choice are the very air that spiritual life needs to breathe. This sets the stage for the final major concept the source explores: how to navigate this complex transition period, especially given the potential for deception.
Ah, yes, the warnings about distortion. This feels crucial.
It really is, because the source gives a stark warning. The primary tactic of the adversarial forces, especially during this pivotal time between ages, isn't necessarily outright destruction or easily recognizable evil. It's far more insidious.
It's distortion, twisting the truth.
Precisely. Corrupting the good, rather than just promoting the bad. This is presented as the key mechanism by which darkness operated and spread during the long night of the Kali Yuga, and why it's so hard to root out.
How does the source claim this distortion happens, especially when it comes to sacred texts, which are supposed to be immutable?
This is another controversial claim. The source suggests that no scripture is necessarily immune. It posits that certain parts of sacred texts explicitly mentioning the Quran again, but also suggesting potential issues within some biblical interpretations and later Jewish writings, may bear traces of this adversarial infiltration.
Infiltration? How? Like rewriting texts?
Not necessarily overt rewriting of originals, perhaps, but more subtle. It suggests this could happen through, say, vulnerable priests, scribes, or interpreters who become corrupted perhaps by intellectual pride, a desire for power, or subtle spiritual compromises. These individuals might then introduce interpretations, commentary, or even additions and omissions over time that subtly twist the original meaning or introduce falsehoods.
So falsehood masquerading as faith, the wolf in sheep's clothing applied to Scripture itself.
That's the idea. Falsehood often mimics the forms and language of truth to gain acceptance. This makes detection incredibly difficult, requiring more than just blind faith.
And the primary weapon in this distortion isn't violence, but bad arguments.
Exactly. Argument, sophistry, false logic, rhetoric that appeals to emotion or prejudice rather than reason and spiritual insight. The source emphasizes that countering this requires more than just prayer or piety. It requires active seeing, sharp discernment, and critical thinking applied to religious claims. Believers need to be spiritually intelligent, not just devout.
They need to be able to recognize the divine signature, even if it appears in an unexpected place, and recognize the adversarial signature, even if it's wrapped in holy language.
That's the challenge. And the source dedicates significant analysis to the Quran's relationship with Christianity as, in its view, a prime example of this sophisticated, distorting strategy at work.
We touched on this briefly. What specific aspects does it highlight?
It focuses on the Quran's direct contradiction of the absolute bedrock of Christian theology, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. As the Apostle Paul himself wrote, if Christ wasn't raised, Christian faith is essentially meaningless, futile.
It's the linchpin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yet, the source points out, the Quran explicitly states that Jesus was not crucified, nor was he killed by his enemies. It claims it only appeared that way to them. Surah 4.157. This isn't a minor difference of interpretation. It's a fundamental, direct denial of the core event upon which Christianity is built.
And the source interprets this denial as
a deliberate, targeted act of spiritual sabotage. An attempt to sever Christians from the foundation of their own faith by introducing a contradictory narrative presented as a later, correcting revelation.
And it goes beyond just the denial, right? The source also mentions new stories about Jesus in the Quran.
Yes. It points to miracles attributed to Jesus in the Quran that are found nowhere in the Gospels or earlier Christian tradition. Things like Jesus speaking with wisdom while still an infant in the cradle, or fashioning birds out of clay and breathing life into them.
Which might seem harmless, maybe even enhancing Jesus' status.
On the surface, perhaps. But the source interprets the purpose differently. It sees the introduction of these novel, unverified miracle stories as a subtle way to undermine the authority and completeness of the existing Gospels. It plants a seed. Maybe the Gospels didn't tell the whole story. Maybe this later text knows things the original disciples didn't.
So it creates doubt, confusion, uncertainty about the original sources.
Precisely. And that insidious uncertainty, that erosion of confidence in established truth, is identified by the source as a classic hallmark of demonic influence, adversarial action. It's not always about outright rejection. Sometimes it's about muddying the waters, mixing truth with falsehood until believers don't know what to trust anymore.
The goal isn't necessarily disbelief, but paralysis through confusion, trapping people in the Kali Yuga mindset.
Exactly. Keep them questioning, keep them divided, keep them from recognizing the actual truth when it arrives. But crucially, this warning isn't just directed outwards.
The source turns the critique inwards too.
Absolutely. It insists that Jews and Christians must apply the same rigorous discernment to their own traditions. They need to vigilantly examine their own histories, interpretations, rituals, and later writings for potential satanic infiltrations, places where ego, power, fear, or misinterpretation might have distorted the original divine spark over the centuries.
So spiritual maturity requires humility and self-critique, not just pointing fingers.
It demands recognizing that no tradition is inherently immune from error or corruption. The adversarial influence seeks to infiltrate everywhere. Therefore, the source provides a simple, almost primal test for discernment, applicable to any teaching, text, or tradition.
What is that fundamental test? How do you tell the difference?
It boils down to this. God is light. The divine manifests as goodness, clarity, truth, love, compassion, freedom, benevolence. Its essence is illuminating and liberating.
And the adversary?
The adversary is night. It manifests as obscurity, deception, confusion, coercion, fear, hatred, malice, control. Its essence is darkening and enslaving. The source argues that a spiritually awake person must learn to differentiate these two fundamental energies, light and night, with the same intuitive certainty they distinguish daytime from nighttime.
So it requires developing an inner sensitivity, an active critical faculty, guided by these core principles, gut feeling combined with reason.
Yes, and the source identifies the greatest potential tragedy, the ultimate danger during this transition, as believers failing this test, failing to recognize the true Messiah, the genuine divine incarnation, when it appears perhaps because it doesn't fit their preconceived notions or comes from an unexpected tradition.
And instead, potentially mistaking God in human form for an imposter or even for the devil himself, precisely because of the confusion sown by these adversarial distortions.
That is presented as the ultimate deception to overcome. It requires active discernment, courage to question assumptions, and trust in the simple test of light versus night, freedom versus coercion.
Which brings us back full circle to the measure of true faith, true religion.
Yes. According to this source, it's ultimately not about the size of the following, the age of the institution, or the rigid adherence to specific doctrines or rituals developed in the age of darkness. The true measure lies in the qualities it cultivates within the human spirit.
Does it foster freedom or demand fearful obedience? Does it promote love and compassion or division and judgment? Does it encourage active discernment or blind belief?
Those are the critical questions. If a tradition is genuinely nurturing freedom, compassion, clarity, and the courage to seek truth wherever it leads, then, the source suggests, it is serving its purpose and preparing souls for the Satya Yuga, the coming age of truth.
Okay, so we began this deep dive looking at a source that challenges our basic understanding of the end times. We found it argues not for destruction, but for a profound, necessary transformation of the planet and humanity.
A transformation guided, the source claims, by the arrival of a single, unified divine figure known by many names like Yahweh, Vishnu, Kalki, but ultimately the one eternal sustainer, fulfilling ancient promises across multiple traditions.
We saw the argument that this new age, the Satya Yuga, requires moving beyond the fragmented dogmas and often coercive practices of the Kali Yuga religions,
Towards a universal understanding based on Sanatana Dharma, the eternal way, fueled by individual free will, spiritual liberty, and active discernment, not by fear or enforced compliance.
The source points to the building of the third temple as a key physical marker, and the ability to distinguish divine light from adversarial night as the key spiritual requirement.
And the message seems to be that the long age of simply waiting and praying is drawing to a close. According to this source, the dawn isn't just coming, it has already begun. Humanity is being actively called to wake up and participate.
The call is discern. See through the cultural packaging, the historical distortions. Awaken to the universal truth that transcends individual religions.
Because, as the source argues repeatedly, religion itself was only ever meant to be a bridge, a temporary structure, necessary during the time of separation and darkness. Once the destination, the divine reality stands present before us.
The bridge dissolves. It becomes part of the landscape, but the path forward is the universal way itself.
Which leaves us, and everyone listening, with a final, quite provocative thought to consider, drawn directly from the source's core argument.
Go ahead.
If the fundamental purpose and effect of your current faith, the traditions you follow, the interpretations you adhere to, if that purpose seems less about cultivating genuine spiritual maturity, intellectual freedom, and active, critical discernment,
And more about enforcing rigid obedience, demanding conformity, instilling fear, or prioritizing political allegiance over personal spiritual seeking.
then you have to ask yourself, is this path truly preparing me, preparing humanity for the coming age of unveiled truth and light? Or is it perhaps unintentionally still binding me through habit, fear, or compulsion to the very age of darkness and confusion that this source claims is now rapidly coming to an end?